Hi and welcome back to the Register Living Room here for our latest vPro workshop, where this time round we're going to be talking quite a lot about Windows 7, because from the reaction we've got, that's something that's on a lot of your minds at the moment. So helping me out are our old mates from Intel. We have Rob the Good Sheppard. Rob, welcome back to the studio.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back here.
Are you a Windows 7 user?
Absolutely.
Good, I'm glad to hear it. And also from our old mates, Freeform Dynamics, we have Andy, Universal Serial Bus. Hi, Andy.
Morning, Tim.
You like that joke? Yeah, I bet they call you that all the time at school. Windows 7 for you?
Absolutely.
Good. Oh, I'm a Mac user myself. You know, Intel Mac. Good. Now, first of all, guys, one of the things you were saying to me, Andy, is that there's going to be this, what you call a trinity of opportunity, where people are just entering this massive possible refresh. Tell me a bit about that.
Well, that's right, because what we've seen over the last few years is Vista really being avoided. The upgrade to Vista was treated with a bit of skepticism because the operating system made so many changes and demands. And we also found with the economic crisis that people were putting off refreshing the hardware. So we've got some aging hardware and a lot of Windows XP, which is coming to the end of its life. And on the other side, now we've had Office 2010 out for a few months, and people are considering moving all three of these together. The latest survey we've done actually shows this is a very popular opportunity.
So Office, Windows 7, and a new computer at the same time?
Absolutely. Three things all at once, just like London buses.
Rob, is this a good idea?
It's certainly a key consideration. I mean, it all depends whether you're going to be deploying the Windows 7 and the Office yourselves, or whether they're going to be resident on the machines you're going to buy in.
Right.
If they're on the machine, if you're
buying new machines, they're going to have Windows 7 on them.
Yeah, if that's your approach, you don't control the image. If you take what's coming to you, then absolutely that's the right consideration. If you control the hardware and then control the software that goes on top, then probably be careful, because if you're waiting for everything, you're just causing a big squeeze and a big bubble of your capital expenditure as and when that comes around. So maybe be careful about your refresh timing. Usual cycles, try and spread out the cost.
Yes, well, there's the cost, and then there's also the overhead on your time, Andy, as well, because you're going to have 3 times as many complaints.
Well, we may do, but we know from all our research that help desk complaints is usually the #1 issue when supporting the desktop anyway. And if we can move to a consistent interface where performance is there, people are on the latest operating system, running consistent applications, and we've got security and stability there, we can actually start to reduce some of those support calls as well. So it's not like support calls will magically go away, but hopefully we can make them more consistent, and by getting the hardware up to date, reduce some of those maybe out of warranty type support calls.
So if you were an IT manager now and you were being told, OK, we've got to do all 3 at once, would that fill you with dread, or would you think this is probably a good thing for my job?
It would be a little bit of both. And the trick will be, as Rob has said, is choosing which is the correct place to upgrade all 3 at the same time, for example. Because not all of the desktops or notebooks in the business need replacing all at once. So it makes sense to choose which hardware needs to be replaced, phased out, and bring it in. But then you've also got to upgrade maybe what's in place, or leave that in place until you can retire it and phase it out. So it's not about a big bang, but it's about planning for the future, because this is the one chance maybe in the next 3 to 4 years where we're going to have an operating system upgrade and a new version of Office out within the same period of time.
OK, so let's have a look at the hardware requirements for that, because I see we've got a lot of comments from people who've been stretching their desktops, and they've got stuff that's 4, 5, sometimes talking about 6 years old desktops. If we're looking at moving to Windows 7, how are the hardware demands going to change, Rob? You'd start this one.
So it's going to be slightly less than you saw with Vista. I mean, that's been one of the big selling points around memory utilization. But actually, it's still slightly more than XP used to be. So you do need to look at making sure you got the right machine that's not just going to be good enough for the usage today, but it's going to be good enough for the usage over that life cycle, whether that's be 3, 4 years. And we we generally recommend a sort of 3-4 year life cycle, depending if it's desktop or notebook.
So what are the things today that are kind of optional, but in 3 or 4 years are not going to be optional, that are going to be standard?
I think one of the things to consider is what's the spec of the machine you're going to need.
Yeah.
Do you need 4 gig of memory? Well, actually, quite frankly, 2 gig is the business standard today. But consider, are you going to be switching over to 64-bit? Then you're going to get the benefits of being able to address bigger memory. So you've got to look at that as a balance. That may be a place where, sticking with 2 gig, you can control some of the capital expenditure or put that money towards other elements of performance. Things like hard disk or a solid state disk. Clearly there's performance differences between those and different benefits. And graphics. Can you get away with just pure integrated graphics? Do you need the discrete graphics that you get on some solutions? Is that something that actually you really need? Are you paying too much for that? So these sort of projects get looked at the high level at the solution side of things, and progressively IT are not getting down into the hardware spec, but the hardware specs do still matter. So.
Yeah, Andy, there's a lot of questions there. Can you give us a steer on some of the areas where you think the money's well spent if we're looking at the hardware refresh?
Absolutely, and what we've seen is over the last few years with the emergence of multi-core processors, that generally Vista and now Windows 7 especially make good use of these. So in business, I think there's a good stable CPU platform, and it is around what are some of the areas that do make a difference. So one of the areas looking forward that we see is security. So do you want to run encrypted hard disks? Moving to Windows 7 means testing all your applications, therefore maybe is the best time to look at things like an encrypted file system, and this can often impact on performance. So choosing, for example, a solid-state hard disk can help things, but often also as well as choosing the most modern processors and more memory can also boost the performance. So we've got to look at some of the new requirements that are coming out, especially as data protection laws and data loss tends to hit the headlines and hit the brand quite heavily if something gets lost.
Well, no, I mean, I hear what you're saying. There's going to be people who are groaning when they heard about data encryption, because I'm just looking at some of the comments we've got on hard drive encryption. And, if your hard drive crashes, life gets complex in a hurry. So somebody saying it runs fine, although it means that laptops essentially become non-portable machines because they can't be run away from a wall socket for a great length of time. No thanks, my other half is forced to run full disk encryption on a laptop. It takes half an hour to start. It's when we're looking at hard drive encryption, you've really got to be very careful what you wish for when you start to implement it.
You certainly do, and quite often it's almost not a decision of the IT department. It's often a business decision, and the IT department has to implement it as best they can without taking a perfectly good PC from a user and handing it back as a lead weight. So I think it's all about balancing the different requirements. And if, for example, encryption is a necessity, it's about how do we do this and still make the users productive. So it may be able to be handled in a refresh. It may also be able to be handled through just upgrading certain components. But it is a big change.
How can we handle this, Rob? Yeah,
I mean, that's some of the areas that Intel's absolutely been looking at, is how do you make some of these things much more effective. So, for example, with the latest Core i5, Core i7 processors, we've got these things called AES instructions. They're basically part of the encryption standards that are used by disk encryption software. So there's a number of instructions in the hardware that make this stuff go faster. So there are solutions that help.
Where are people going to notice the difference there? Is that going to be just on the day-to-day working? They're going to see the difference on boot up?
You should see the difference on boot up and actually on performance as well, because what it means is that encryption, the on-the-fly encryption and decryption, can be done much quicker. So you're not seeing any performance impact on that. That's certainly one way to approach it. Yeah. The other approach would be solid-state disk. Those things will boot much faster.
Do you think the solid-state disk, do you think that's going to become a normal part of the desktop in the next 3, 4, 5 years?
Progressively so. It's not necessarily for the fixed desktop For laptops, absolutely, it's part of how do you reduce the overall cost of support. And taking away a moving device in that machine actually does eliminate a lot of support costs related to hard disk failures.
Andy, when we're talking about encryption, again, my question is, how standard is that going to become? Is it going to be standard to have an encrypted hard disk?
More and more so, particularly as data breach notification laws come in and people get responsible. And of course, now we see the majority of PC purchases today are actually notebooks, which means if you don't encrypt data and it gets lost, you could well be up for a fine, for example, from the Data Commissioner's Office. So it makes sense to encrypt data, and whole disk encryption is becoming more and more accepted. And long term, we expect that a lot of these technologies will be built into both the operating system or else the base PC itself.
Now, we've got a lot of feedback though from people who are saying, I've got my old PC, it's running Windows XP, it's not broken, I don't really need to fix it. So all these things that we're talking about, they're going to treat them as a nice to have for another year, couple of years maybe, if they can keep their stuff working for that long. Is that something that in your research, the Freeform Dynamics, you're seeing is a big part of the IT department's thinking at the moment?
It certainly is. I think people look to sweat the assets they've got if they don't have a perceived problem. And in fact, what we see is in notebooks, it's maybe the lifespan's been pushed out from a 3-year refresh to now a 4-year and touching 5-year at times. And for non-performance users, the desktop's hitting 6, 7, or even 8 years old. And the difficulties is the user might think that's fine. They're running the apps that they were running when they got the machine. These are perhaps 8 years old now, and that means probably out of support in many cases, not getting security patches. So in the modern world, it's a risk, and some companies are prepared to accept that risk. But ideally, what we're looking to do is move to a modern generation of hardware and software where we can actually deal with those security risks, maybe using something like the XP mode in Windows 7, where you can wrap it up with some extra security and compatibility on modern hardware.
So they can, so they use Windows 7, but in the XP mode?
Yes, and that can help with the migration of old applications, or to add extra security where you couldn't run it on older hardware. So what we really want to do is move away from relying on legacy applications stopping us moving, or bringing old applications that we still need to use but aren't being updated to a modern security standard.
Are you seeing the use of the XP mode in Windows 7?
Certainly hearing that is being looked at as that aid to look at that transition. I mean, from a lot of large enterprise companies certainly are already moving or looking to move, probably in conjunction with Service Pack 1 as per usual. When you cut down into the small medium business market, you get what you're given. You can roll back to XP as some customers do, but we hear some people have challenges, but XP mode is a good way to be able to overcome them. I'd like to just come back to the point you raised on the security side of those older machines, because I think it was a TechAisle report in the US which looked at small medium business, basically found that those machines over 3 years old were something like 50% more susceptible to security problems. And that's not an implicit issue about the hardware, but purely because, as Andy was saying, you've got an older install base. People probably haven't kept those up to date with all the patches, all the updates, and quite frankly, you're risking things because you're into an unknown territory.
So it becomes harder just to manage that process of patching and keeping it up to date.
As Andy said, some of the things are beyond support, so there are no patches. So you're blind to vulnerabilities.
There's some feedback from the readers here that they're talking about how they have that 3-year refresh cycle just because at 3 years it's out of warranty, and so at that point, a whole comfort blanket goes away.
It should be no surprise that costs go up once you're outside warranty.
Yeah.
Whether that's a 3-year warranty or I think there was one education case there where it was a 4-year warranty. Once you go beyond that, you're into the realms of you sort out yourselves. And again, the TechAisle report said basically per incident it was something like £300 per incident relating to a support of those machines outside warranty. You're getting well into the realms of the cost of a new machine.
Yeah, it comes out of a different budget, though, doesn't it?
Budget.
I mean, that's the problem. We don't always see it. I mean, one of the things, I guess, with this, Andy, it's very hard to measure the cost, the comparative cost moving, not moving sometimes.
That certainly is the case, especially when you factor in things like the case of lost productivity. So the machine blue screens and needs to be rebuilt, and someone's without a machine for a day or has to do a trip. How do you factor in the cost of their salary, for example, or the lost productivity? And that's often not an IT cost, but a business cost. So it can often be a false economy to run machines, but the problem is many companies don't really have a way to measure all of these different areas. So they've got to do the best they can within the budgets they have. And the best we can hope for really is to make the case to the business that we're seeing a lot of downtime on these users to try and accelerate the refresh if it is becoming a significant problem.
It's a kind of a weak case to make at the moment, isn't it, if you go in with that? Is there a way to be more specific? Do you have any evidence that people are getting better at measuring this?
Well, what we see is that help desk support costs are one of the highest contributors to running the desktop estate today. But end-user training is one of the lowest areas of investment. So it's almost a chicken and egg situation. We're not going to improve the cost of supporting the desktop estate without actually improving end-user training. And it's where's the crossover point that we actually get more out of putting the training in than we get in having to support users' problems.
Rob, is there anything... do we have any sort of hard facts about, for example, if you're moving to a new desktop, Windows 7 instead of the old desktop XP? Do we know how much cheaper it is to manage and run?
I think you've got to look at the whole aspects. It's actually, and you touched on it.
Yeah.
One of those this is user productivity. It's one of those factors which is actually probably one of the biggest reasons why. I mean, let's step back. Why do we have IT? Why do we have those capabilities? It's to allow business to run more effectively. It doesn't exist for its own sake. It's about business effectiveness. User productivity is a part of business effectiveness. And you've got to try and look at that. And we know it's difficult. It's one of those soft areas. But I don't know you, Andy, but moving over to Windows 7, pretty much intuitive as you've done it, and absolutely far more sense of productivity because you can just get to things so much quicker, so much more effective. And that was going from XP. So I think you've got to look at those aspects. I think on the manageability side, I don't know if you've got data from, because you've done a fair bit of surveys in their space, but again, keeping up to date, keeping into the latest environment, ultimately you're going to keep your operational costs down.
Yeah. I feel sorry for the guys. There was one guy in the survey who's got told that he had to move to Vista just before Windows 7 came out. Now they're stuck in the corner with the Vista, and everyone's gone straight through to Windows 7. So yeah, sorry if that's you. Well, what can we do about that, eh? Tell me, we brushed on this a little bit before. But we didn't. I'd like to hear a little bit more on it. The difference when you're moving to 64-bit, does it make very much difference, Andy?
It doesn't make much difference up front in terms of what the user experience is out of a machine.
Yeah.
But long term, it is the future of where the desktop is going. If you're putting more than 2 gig of RAM into a machine, 32-bit can't really take advantage of anymore. So as soon as you go beyond 2 gig, you should really be looking at 64-bit. And also, even if you've got 2 gig, you can still run 64-bit, no problem. And since Windows 7 is probably the main significant upgrade for the next 4 or even 5 years, it makes sense to at least evaluate it now. And since we're going to have to be testing again all the apps we're going to run, moving from XP to 7, testing on a 64-bit platform makes a lot of sense. End-user training is the same because it's the same interface, so there's no impact there. And it just means that you get the choice of running either more memory or running 64-bit apps as they come to market, rather than always having to default to the 32-bit.
I guess especially if you're going to sweat this generation and you want some sort of security about that, then moving to 64-bit at this time means that you've got more headroom.
It does, but again, it does make sense for many to move en masse if you've already got existing machines, for example. So it's about choosing the right time to move, but to be considering it now and testing now, so that especially the power users who are likely to be demanding can be supported, and then rolling it out through the rest of the organisation, but having tested and being comfortable that the apps and drivers and everything else work as expected.
Rob, what proportion of people do you see moving to 64-bit now?
You know, to be honest, I don't have a feel for it. I mean, we ourselves have gone to 64-bit, but then we're in that move across to something new. It's an ideal opportunity to bring that in at the same point in time, as opposed to have to again look at it 2 years down the road. Why not implement it now? Put the capability there, as you said, some level of headroom to be able to adapt to your needs in the next 3-4 years as you again go through further refreshes.
It's amazing how our perceptions change. I mean, you know, I'm not telling you how old I am. It's none of your business, frankly. But I remember when we were talking about, you know, do we really need, you know, 640k and that sort of thing, you know, up to 1 megabyte, and as time goes on, we expand our perception of what we need. And we're talking about 2 gig now. Shouldn't that really be fine for the next generation of software?
Well, you don't want to be on 1 gig today, that's for sure. You're going to see something like a 30-40% improvement in a Windows 7 environment just by going to 2 gig. So, but if you go to 4 gig,
you're not going to see anything.
You're not going to see really anything. So, although naturally we think as consumers 4 is better than 2, twice as good. No, not the case.
Twice as expensive.
There's costs associated. That's why I mentioned it earlier. Think about the system specifications. Don't just automatically assume 2 is better than 1, 4 is better than 2, etc.
How soon before we're going to have to be moving on to 4, Andy?
Well, memory advances very rapidly, so I think the cost issues will mean that within 2 years, probably 4 gig will be the de facto standard. We're already seeing a lot of consumer PCs shipping with 64-bit, and it requires the same amount of resources to run as a 32-bit. You're not really having an impact, and you've got compatibility mode through things like Windows 7 or running other types of virtual machines if you really need it. So I think it makes a lot of sense if you can seize the nettle and actually move forward with a 64-bit implementation. We saw the transition already with Windows 3 to Windows 95, and then with NT moving from the old 16-bit legacy up to modern 32-bit architecture.
Okay. Now, for the last thing I want to cover today is to look at a little bit more detail about notebooks. There are a lot of our readers of its notebook is kind of like it's the new desktop, and but at the same time they're finding that portability, the dream of mobility for notebooks, isn't really quite all it's set out to be. And is Windows 7 going to make things much better for them, Andy?
I think on a number of cases, yes, it will. Number one, it's a lot more modern, therefore a lot more secure. That's probably the be-all and end-all for many businesses in terms of users out on the road. It's a lot cheaper to support longer term, and it's also more reliable generally because it can take advantage of the features of the modern hardware platform. And also there's a lot more management hooks built into it, so it's actually cheaper to maintain longer term and easy to deploy, install, patch and maintain. So when you're on the road and things go wrong, ideally it's a little bit easier to bring up back to capacity than maybe XP was in the past.
Do you see the difference, Rob?
Absolutely. Just on the wireless connectivity, it's a lot simpler to make those remote connections, see what's available. So my experience there is you're not struggling, so I used to find with XP of, okay, how do I make this thing work? I've got to reset that and make the connection again. Windows 7 does make that life so much easier. My experience is absolutely much more mobile, portable lifestyle, work style.
If your laptop's a couple of years old, if you move to Windows 7 on that, is that going to be a blessing or a curse?
If you just purely put Windows 7 on there, I think you'll find it is a blessing. Yeah. But is that going to last you for another 2-3 years? I think you probably need to look at that carefully. Again, it all goes back to that
people
whole
are going to start
refresh.
laughing at your notebook, aren't they, in a couple of years' time,
Well,
if you've got an old one.
To be honest, I mean, you've got to look at the whole aspect of feature capabilities, etc., but also the robustness. More mobile lifestyles, these things do get battered around a bit, and especially if you're not buying a more hardened, business-focused type of machine, something that's a bit more consumer end, then you're going to find that it's not going to survive those airline travelling and trains and all those things, places where these things get dropped and bashed around a bit.
So, Andy, are we getting to a stage now where we're expecting to get the full functionality we'd have in the office when we're out of the office? A company and our users getting that, and our IT department's able to provide it. Is Windows 7 part of that change?
I think we're on the cusp of that. Some companies are very good at providing that type of access, and they're actually very proactive about allowing remote access to systems, or even buying things like cloud applications, which you can access remotely. And Windows 7 can really help with the ease of connectivity and how that works. The other side of things, of course, is some companies are a bit afraid of that, so they're shutting down the firewalls and only allowing people to connect internally over or also over dedicated secure channels, for example. It's a mindset thing in many companies, being able to provide this type of remote work. But all the research we've shown shows that once people can do this, they become a lot more productive. And it's not about looking over someone's shoulder, are they working? It's about trusting them to do the job that you're paying them to do effectively and in a way that makes them happy. But the other side of that, of course, is many of them want to use things like consumer applications to help them in their work. So it opens another can of worms as how do you support a lot of these new applications out there, even the Facebooks and the Twitters and other sides things. These are just some examples of the new social media technologies that people are using to communicate and get their jobs done.
Mm-hmm. So it was one thing that a lot of comments are about is providing like a sort of a desktop image, so that whatever you're using, whatever device you're using, you get the business part of your PC delivered in its own little virtual packet. Is that something that you think is again going to become the standard?
It's something that we very much see a huge amount of value in, but today it's still a fairly small part of the IT manager's approach to providing sort of applications and services. But one of the things we've seen is there's an incredible interest in slate devices, like the iPad, for example, to work in conjunction with your traditional notebooks, because these things are not the be-all and end-all of IT. They're useful to take with you and consume content, but trying to create it is quite difficult. But you can use things like remote desktop solutions from the likes of Citrix or VMware and Microsoft to provide a virtual desktop down to the interface, or you can have web applications, for example, as well, that you can work on data that's accessible in cloud storage, for example.
Mm-hmm. That's Rob. Andy's saying at the moment there's not so many people doing that. Do you think it's a good idea, though? Do you think more people ought to
There's
be
a
doing
lot of people talking about it.
Yeah.
For sure. Probably one of the biggest hot topics, and you actually merged two of the biggest hot topics, the tablets and virtualization together. Mm-hmm. It's probably the way things go. We're at an inflection time period at the moment where a lot of the early thinkers are absolutely out there figuring out how they can bring this in. And to be honest, our advice is IT need to be looking at how they be flexible to the new things coming through. They've got new generation of users who've grown up with PCs and compute devices. If you don't figure out ways to adopt some of these new trends, then they'll work around you. And the last thing you really want, probably, is that your business or your IP and all that's being discussed over more unsecure channels. You want to be able to bring that in and have some semblance of control and guidance, but make it something that helps user productivity.
Okay, so we're more or less out of time, guys, but just before we go, if there's people watching this today and they've got this Windows 7 transition coming up, is there one piece of advice that you'd single out which would be really useful from your experience or your research? Andy, I'll give you the start on this one.
I would actually say to look at the advanced management features that Windows 7 has got compared, say, to XP, and then look at how things like vPro in the hardware can actually help you take advantage of this, because it's the ongoing management that's one of the biggest costs of IT today. And so this can help cut the support costs, increase end user satisfaction, and actually enable you to do a lot more with a bit less.
Okay, great. And Rob?
I'd say the hardware, I mean, Andy sort of touched on the vPro elements, but just purely at the processor end of things, think about what spec of processor you put in there. If you buy up to something like a Core i5 processor, you're going to get the benefits of these accelerated encryption capabilities. You've got benefits of turbo boost hyperthreading, which are worked much more closely and interlocked with Windows 7. It can much more better use those features and capabilities.
Okay, Rob, Andy, thank you very much. That's all from our vPro workshop today. Please tune in for the next one. I think we've got another one coming up soon. And so if you've got any comments on this, keep them coming in, because they give us something to talk about. Thank you for watching this. I've been Tim the Register Phillips. See you next time.